All right, thanks for posting the address in the chat there, Jill. I appreciate that. So we'll get started now, um, and I'll just read out this first comment in the chat posted by Jill. Thanks to everyone for coming, of course. And the show that we're about to talk about today, the two shows actually, are up until September 4th at B Contemporary Gallery. And the address for the gallery is 7869 Yonge Street in Innisfil, Ontario. So we hope that after the talk, if you haven't already, you'll go and check out the show featuring Regina Williams, Jill Price, and Marlene Hilton Moore. So my name is Tyler Durbano, and I'm coming to you from the MacLaren Art Centre in the Prints and Drawings room. I am the accessibility coordinator, and I'm so happy to talk to Marlene Hilton Moore and Jill Price and Regina Williams, three amazing artists who make up the fabric of this great artist community that we have here in Barrie in the area. So I'm so delighted to talk to you about your two shows, LUSH, which features Marlene Hilton Moore and Jill Price, and 470 Days, which features Regina Williams. So before I go any further, I would like to give a land acknowledgement. It's important to acknowledge that the gallery is located on the unceded traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, which include the Odawa, Ojibwe, and Bodwe-Otomé nations, collectively known as the Three Fires Confederacy. The local bands consist of the Chippewa Tri-Council, who are made up of the Beausoleil First Nation, Georgina Island First Nation, and Rama First Nation. I'd also like to acknowledge the Wendat Huron Nation, who occupied these lands prior to the middle of the 17th century. As a settler, I'm grateful to live and work in this place, and I hope that through land acknowledgements we can be reminded of our responsibilities to the peoples who lived and care for this land and to the land itself. And so, like I said, I'm with the MacLaren Art Centre, but I'm so happy to be partnering with Be Contemporary to support them in with some exhibition programming related to these two wonderful shows. So maybe I will just introduce the artists that we have here a little bit further. I'll start with Marlene and read this lovely bio that she has for me. So for the past 20 years, Marlene Hilton Moore's studio work has engaged the identity of female in today's society through sculpture, audiovisual, visual installations, and most recently photography. Her extensive schedule of solo and group exhibitions includes galleries in Ontario, Quebec, and the East Coast. And Marlene has been a recipient of many public art commissions over the last 20 years. Her distinctive Canadian profile visual arts is marked by outstanding achievements at local and national levels, particularly in the complex arena of public art and monuments. Significant public monuments include the Valiants Memorial at Confederation Square in Ottawa, the Borden Legacy Monument at CFB Borden, as well as Weedok Dadwin at the Simcoe County Museum in Barrie. In 2010, Marlene Hilton Moore retired from her professorship at Georgian College, the School of Design and Visual Art, following a distinguished 25-year teaching career. And in 2014, she received the City of Barrie's Excellence in Arts Award. Jill Price, who we have here today, is an interdisciplinary artist who achieved her BFA and BEd at the University of Western and received Shirk Research Fellowship for her OCAD MFA thesis, Land as Archive, a collection of seen and unseen shadows. Having come to realize how all art is land art, Price is using her PhD Shirk research and teaching fellowship at Queen's to investigate how unmaking can be a generative process that can disrupt colonial, settler, and capitalist logics and aesthetics and give back time and space to more than human ontologies. And we'll see some of that, the unmaking that she talks about in her bio today in her artwork. And last but certainly not least is Regina Williams, who is a Fine Arts Honors graduate from Georgian College. Primarily a painter, Williams was the 2001 winner of the RBC Private Council New Canadian Painting Award, and in 2012 participated in a one-month residency at Foundation Valparaiso in Spain. Having explored other media throughout her professional career, Williams has exhibited extensively in solo and group exhibitions. Williams' work can be found in many private collections throughout North America, in the collections of the MacLaren Art Centre, RBC, and Scotia McLeod. And Regina is represented by Roberts Gallery in Toronto. And I also wanted to mention Jeanette Luchese, who is the owner and curator at B Contemporary Gallery, who curated these two shows. She's also an interdisciplinary artist and first-generation Italian-Canadian settler with roots in design, and creates artwork in the disciplines of drawing, painting, printmaking, sculpture, and sound. And we hope she can join us a little bit later today. But without further ado, I would love to jump into some of the questions regarding the artwork that is up as Be Contemporary today. If anyone from the audience has questions, we will get to those at the last part of the talk today. So feel free to type them into the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen as you think of them, and we will address them at the end. So maybe I'll start by sharing my screen so we can see a little bit of the artwork. I just have some shots that I took on my phone, so they're not the best at the moment, and they're of the individual artist's works. So let me just start by sharing my screen here. All right, you should see a work here by Jill Price. And I'll ask Jill to unmute. Perfect.
Yep, you can see it.
So maybe we'll start with Jill, and then we'll follow up with Marlene and Regina with this question. But maybe, Jill, can you start by explaining your art practice and the work that's featured at Be Contemporary?
Sure. So I was, I think it was in May, I was contacted by Jeanette Luchese, who had mentioned that Marlene was coming to show her wonderful work at the intersection of photography and textiles, and was looking for an artist to pair her work with, being one of the artists with the gallery. And Marlene had seen some of my small entanglement sculptures, which are sort of evolved out of, I guess, looking at and reflecting on the amount of material excess in my own closet, as well as research that arose out of my MFA that ultimately revealed how materials linger, take up space, create shadows, and continue to colonize our landscapes, and which is, disconcerting as arable land continues to be eaten up by industrial expansion. So just really was looking at how I can prevent sort of our material waste, specifically textiles, from heading to our landfills, and began to sort of dismantle old sweaters that I had. And then eventually I was finding sort of detritus after winter thaws, where old mittens and hats and scarves would be found. These little sad objects would be left behind. They're cold and they're wet. And so I began to pick them up and care for them, and send some of them to thrift stores that were still of use, donate them, and then keep the ones behind that were no longer wearable for further dismantling, and ultimately my continued excess of material. So those are entanglements, and they've been evolving, I guess, for 4 years now, dealing with the title LUSH. Just sort of, there's this play on the lushness of the textile, but also that we're sort of drunk with the materials that surround us and call to us to purchase them. So that this overabundance of material that is very much part of Western culture, consumption, capitalism. And so yeah, that's what they've evolved out of. And in this particular piece, really sort of challenging the female figure, the female body, female consumer producer to question our ongoing consumption and ask what we're consuming. What are these materials attached to? Are they attached to human suffering in different parts of the world? Are they attached to environmental devastation because of our ongoing consumption? So really challenging, asking myself to really look at what I'm consuming and where it's coming from and what it will do upon its discard.
That's wonderful, Jill, and I'm so happy that you have as your background that part of the show of the exhibition space with your work, to see more of the layout of the show there. And I'm really interested in how you were talking about the consumption of materials, especially as they're like marketed to women. So I hope maybe we can address that at the end during the Q&A period, but I think that's a really interesting aspect of your work. Let's go to Regina next. I think I have or actually let's go to Marlene. I have your work coming up next here. So I'll just repeat the question quickly. If you could just explain your art practice and especially the work that's featured at Be Contemporary, Marlene.
Yes, well, basically I'm a sculptor. So we have the mannequin wearing the crazy quilt dress on the screen. And I actually consider that a sculpture. I consider that a sculpture. It's just the idea of taking something that's flat like fabric or a sheet of steel and seaming it together, whether you seam it with a weld or you seam it with a stitch. To me, it's a very, very fun parallel. And even though being a sculptor for the past maybe 8-9 years, I felt a tremendous need to bring color back into my life. And I began experimenting with photography. And so combined with my interest in women and the female perspective, I started a series of photographs about a woman, a place, and a dress. So basically, I chose a woman, I chose a place that belonged to her, and I created a dress for this woman that specifically fit each photo series. So I think that the partial parallel to Jill's, there's the peony dress. Of course, that's 48 peonies, 22 layers per peony. I don't know, about a year and a half of work. These things are labors of love. And although I'm not gathering my materials off the street, I'm often ravaging remnant containers at fabric stores. And I'm looking at repurposing the history of women, particularly in my family, but women almost everywhere, I think, of handwork. And one of the other things that I know invades everything in these photographs and in these dresses is just the idea of beauty. I'm consumed by wanting and desiring the feeling of looking at something that's beautiful. It could be ugly, but it could be beautiful. And so I just want this tumble of beauty to exercise some of the pain that's happening. And so the focus on women, the focus on a concept that belongs to a particular individual woman, and moving forward through the Peonia Beauty work with a peony dress to this current one with the chair, my studio chair with its beautiful patchwork of leftover materials, and the fiddle these things are part of my newest photo series called Inside My Skin. And basically Inside My Skin is trying to find out what is inside myself that my mind and my heart and my soul actually are just drawing me to at this point in time. So I do recycle. I'm fascinated by the parallel between the three of us, Regina, Jill, and myself, about pulling the materials from other places and fitting them into new creative ideas. And hopefully all of it one day, if nobody wants it, will just recycle back into the earth.
That's great, Marlene. And I couldn't help but pick up on that as well between Jill, Regina, and yourself, this idea of reusing things that maybe have been forgotten or put aside for some reason. I don't want to use, the first word that comes to my mind is upcycled, but I don't think that is the right word all the time, especially for maybe what Regina does. But let's talk to Regina now and hear what she has to say about her her practice, especially all the work that you made in this for this show, 470 days.
Okay, 470 days was the time from the initial lockdown till my first vaccine, hence the name of the show. I, as most of you probably know, I'm a painter mostly, but I've always enjoyed doing other mixed media work. So during COVID, painting just wasn't there for me, and I really needed to do something creative. And I had all of this material in my basement for decades. Old photos in a box, stamps, letters, and about 1 million postcards. So I decided that I would use these. I don't need to go out for any supplies, and it's all here. So the postcards, it's hard to explain people ask me, how did you know what to put together? But I had quite a few laid out at a time, plus a lot of all of the material. And sometimes it was just a walk by thing, and you pick up one thing and that just goes. Sort of the Arthur Koestler act of creation, where things come together in a way about everything we've ever known, and in a dreamlike way. And that explains kind of a way of intuition, besides using the experience of what images would go together, image-wise, color-wise. Yeah, it was just fun.
I'd love to hear more about also the sculptural elements that you have in the show, because from the images that I've been showing on the screen, one might think that it's all postcards and collage, which are amazingly interesting, but there's also these wonderful handmade clay sculptures and the postage stamp sculpture. Do you want to speak to those?
Yes, the ribbon is 470 stamps. I've torn stamps off envelopes my whole life and thrown them in a box, so I could do 470 more days, but don't want to. So I just started gluing on every day, and in the end stitched them onto the ribbon for no real reason. And it's lovely to see them actually there, because I didn't know what would happen with it. The sculptures were serendipitous too, in that a friend who does more functional pottery offered me some clay, and I've always enjoyed clay. And I don't know if you can see it, but my sense was that I just wanted to play with it. I just wanted to feel it and squeeze it. And hence they're all about my hand size squeezed, which is obviously still imprinted on the body and the torso of the little people.
And so I have a question for each of the artists, and Regina sort of spoke to this just a moment ago with her work, but I wonder how you find the materials to make your work. I know personally how you all find them, but it's a really interesting story. Do you want to start, Jill, just talking about how you found the material resources to make your work?
Well, like Regina, I think I began by mining my own excess of material from my closet. I have to admit, I was, you know, up until my 30s, very much a victim of fashion and a clothes horse, as you'd say, and even my weakness today is heading to a local thrift store to mine something that someone else could no longer wear. So yeah, so the obviously my own closet, thrift stores, specifically the figurines and all of the sconces and wall supports came from the thrift stores, and even Facebook Marketplace has become a real tool for me, especially during COVID shutdown, because I was still able to do pickups from people's front porch and, you know, send an email payment, and I couldn't get into the thrift stores. So that became my habit of consuming for this show, as well as Unfurled and Aurelia. And then, as I mentioned, it was a winter thaw in Kingston. You know, the amount of stuff that university students just feel like they leave behind or lose, or I don't know why there's so much clothing all over campus, but I really did start to have empathy for these objects left behind, and probably because they, you know, a hat, mitten, scarf, they all indicate the human form. They are measures of the human body. And so I really began to empathize with them and began to think, they made me begin to think about the real physical human bodies who are left out in the cold, who are left behind, who are discarded as part of our culture. And just really made me take note of that both the material, the physical material, non organic material, as well as human material, is often discarded if we don't fit into the sort of capitalist machine that demands us to perform and produce and consume. So
it's interesting. All of these materials that you're using are mainly reclaimed and found, and you're saying that they've been discarded. But when I look at a sculpture like the one that's on the screen now, and it's attached to a figurine, like a human body, it's almost as if the material is clinging to not let go and not be discarded again, almost. And I hadn't made that connection until you just brought that up. It's almost like when you find before that hat is discarded onto the street or lost in the winter snow, it's the human that puts on the hat and wears it as they see fit. But now it's the exact opposite. It's this engulfing thing, and that really it's the material that seems to have the power now over these sculptures. I find that reversal is pretty interesting for me. Marlene, do you want to talk about how I know you said you went to, you collected some of the materials for your dresses, excuse me. But how did you find some of the other things? Like, how did you come upon this antique mannequin that you've used as a model and also as a figure in some of your photographs?
Well, I'm a bit like Jill in that I do haunt secondhand stores, venues, and I found this mannequin on Queen Street in Toronto, kind of an antique / junk shop. I've had her for a dozen years. I've lost her legs, but I made her a new base. But she was so exquisite that I just kept her around. I kept the top of her body everywhere. It's my living room and, you know, my dining room, wherever. And so she was so unique and so precious. We were talking earlier, all of us, about the preciousness of things and how we could make them a little bit less precious. But in some ways, I find I make things a bit more precious. So even though I'm using only remnants, mostly from the fabric store bins to create the crazy quilt dress, to upholster the chair, Tim Bilton and I pulled our scraps, and the sides of that chair, which you can't see, are my old Persian lamb coat. And handily, the pockets are still there. So I just put my journal in the pocket and sit in the chair and, you know, right away. And the fiddle, this is a wooden fiddle, but again, there's this need to make something that I think is so important in my own life and in the culture, say, of the East Coast. I took an old fiddle and I cast it in bronze. It is on the wall behind the chair, but I felt that that instrument, that culture that it held, the music was so precious. I had to cast it in the most precious material of all, which was bronze. You know, bronze is ancient as a material and a process. So I sort of mix and match, but I'm working with as much as I can what I have, as little excess as possible, thinking carefully about even my photo shoots. It's one woman, one dress. I've expanded a little in the new photo shoot, so it's a woman, mannequin, dress, chair, and fiddle, but carefully coordinating the amount of things I might create and make so that I know I'm adding to the world, but hopefully it'll all recycle back into the earth, you know, one day. I think you could pitch that chair and it would get consumed. But the business of recycling materials and objects and textiles, and then again, recycling, the other thing is the handwork of the women of all cultures, and certainly the women of my own history. So materiality and color, I have to say, I'm obsessed with color. So my new photo shoot is so colorful that I think people are going to have to step out of the room or something. So those are some of the things that are happening with material and idea, I guess, about material.
So in your response, you touched on two things that I want to pick up on, and that was care and this idea of preservation. And with all three of your practices, I feel like collecting has an important role, and I also get the sense that that collecting is tied up with care and preservation and even transformation. Can you talk about how the idea of care and transformation and collecting, how you see that in your work? Regina, I know that we were talking about this on Friday, how you see the transformation as a little bit of care and preservation. Can you talk about that?
Yes, they are preserved, these things, probably in a better way than if they were just in boxes in my basement. They're preserved. That one doesn't have much of the preservation, mostly just fun things. The preserving to me has been important because during making these things, I've had a lot of opportunity to contemplate, especially in the photos. These photos, some of them were early 20th century of my grandmother, my father when he was a baby. And these are precious things, but they're not precious if they're stored away in the basement getting mildewy. And I think they've, in a way, become more precious by having them mounted and displayed.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting thing, that by changing them or gluing them or even perhaps cutting them up, you're actually preserving them and showing them in a way that they wouldn't otherwise be shown. They might be under your bed somewhere or in a basement. Jill, do you want to take that question as well? That idea of transformation and care in your work?
Yeah, I don't know if preservation would be my choice of word. Other than that, when I gathered up things from the ground and took them home and cared for them, washed them, and saw that they were still usable, I would. I did preserve those, and as I said, I donated them. I would say that I'm actually redressing the materials more. I'm giving them a new context, or I'm actually looking at them as the raw versus trying to preserve what they represent or the purpose they served initially, so that they take on a new value. as a building, a touching off point, or if I carefully unravel old hats or mittens or sweaters, that they can be used for something else. So there's a preservation, I guess, of the constituent parts of these elements. And then there's also something to be said about preserving that which hasn't been extracted or used up in terms of our natural elements like water, energy, soils, whatever that is required in the production of textiles or ceramics. And so I wouldn't say I'm necessarily preserving that which exists, but rather more that which we haven't touched, or yeah. So that's.
Yeah, I get that. And now I'm rethinking my next question that I had for you, which was the idea of preciousness. And I didn't know if you actually saw that as part of your work, but when you reframed the idea of like what you were just talking about preserving, let's say, the environment or the landscape through not putting those materials back into a waste site, or not even producing new ones to begin with, there is a preciousness that we can talk about in terms of the environment as separate from the work that might be on the wall. But I do feel, especially with your work, and when you were talking about that you collecting maybe a lost hat on the street, there is something kind of precious that I find in that inanimate object somehow. It has an energy to it. And even that act of care of you taking them home and washing them and either donating them or reusing them seems like you're treating it with some form of, and obviously,
Reverence.
yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And then,
yeah, it has worth. It has worth even in its ruin,
mm-hmm.
as in terms of its constituent parts. Even an act of care is to be valued. And if that can transfer to me taking note of the humans that may be on the street that or are sort of left out in the cold, and being more generous with them, that to me was something that in collecting those materials, that actually pushed me to really consider how I engage with those people. Yeah, I guess. And then the other thing that everything that we own, every object, is only 5% of the material that actually goes into its production. And so in honoring that 5%, we also work to value that which we can't see that went into that, the labor, the resources. So yeah, it's definitely many different levels of preciousness or value, I think, that I'm trying to recognize in the unmaking and reconfiguration.
And Regina or Marlene, I definitely see a lot of, I keep using the word preciousness, and I feel like it has a connotation of being maybe too like saccharine, and I don't mean it in that way, but I really feel like there are aspects of both of your work that are precious and like have a need to be cared for in certain ways. Do you want to talk about, Regina, maybe do you want to talk about the preciousness of your work and how you navigate that when you're cutting it up, or you're deciding, I'm never going to use this, I'm going to throw it away instead? How do you navigate that?
Well, if I didn't throw it away, probably the next generation would. So, so for that reason, they've definitely become more precious and more visible. Also, I think because initially I started out doing some larger collages, and somehow the postcard said, deal with me, and you end up with then small precious things rather than some bigger collage. Especially the photos seem to work in this format because many were small and black and white. So they are precious. Each one of those little postcards, in a way, are precious little things, besides just the images themselves.
And what about you, Marlene? Did you have anything to add to that?
Well, I almost feel like at times I'm in the business of preciousness. Just the idea of the joy of creating something and making art and making art feel precious, but at the same time, and also treating the history of women's work as precious, as a skill and as a tradition. So, but I also am very conscious and aware of what it means to not overload the world as much as possible. I like Jill, I was just a fashion addict. I hate to tell you how many pairs of shoes I have. But I also, for instance, the photographic series, I only print just exactly what I need for an exhibition. I archive the rest, they're digital, so I archive them. So I might print 6 to 9 prints for any given exhibition. If someone wants another one, then I could have it printed. So as an actual home. The same with even sculpture, you know, you can create a sculpture and take a mold and cast the first one. And if another one is needed, then you cast it, so that always one is very carefully producing as much as possible. And then using, again, that reuse of what you have to look with fresh eyes at what you see around you and say, how can I treat that preciously? So it's part of my take on precious, and the feeling that if we valued what we have already, instead of I need the next version, or I need more, or if we really value what we have and treat it as precious, I think there will be a lot less consumerism too. So my focus foremost is making the piece of art, but I'm always making it within the context of these other considerations.
And so I really encourage everyone to go and see the exhibition in person, because the photos that I've provided here really don't do the show justice. There's so much more texture, there's so much more detail. And when you visit in person, you definitely begin to see the cross connections that Jeanette was thinking about when she had Regina in the adjacent space to Jill and Marlene in the main space. And so my next question would be, you know, even though there are 2 distinct exhibitions going on at Be Contemporary right now with distinct themes, there's a real centering of a woman in both shows. I'm wondering if you can talk about your display strategies, even more of your material choices and your research that point back to women at the center of your work. And I know maybe we'll start with Jill. I know you were talking a little bit about the marketing of materials towards women. Maybe you can talk about that.
Yeah, I think, you know, when I was doing my MFA, I had a real awakening in terms of, well, I had to walk through Yorkville every day to take the GO train down to OCAT, and the amount that those fashion windows were turning over. Like, the fashion industry is no longer 4 seasons. It actually turns over something like every 2 weeks in terms of a collection. And so I just, like, where is that all going? Like, I had already sort of escaped my relentless consumption at that point, but it really, it made me see very clearly that we are producing more than we can even consume as a society. And I'm sorry, I feel like I already got lost on your question. What was your question again?
I was saying how a woman's identity is sort of at
Yeah,
the center
yeah.
of the work.
Okay, yeah, and so those windows, you know, they're beautiful objects. Like it's hard to walk by those windows, and you know, you're drawn in by the textures, by the colors, by the new styles, and you know, even if we go and talk about something as simple as a razor, you know, the pink and purple and green razors that are marketed towards women, and they're more expensive, and you know, it's than a man's razor. It's just really interesting how they've done all of this research on branding and marketing to women, and specifically, and what that actually means in terms of you know, us buying and the cost of us buying or using, you know. So it's I think I've just become more aware of it, how we are um, uh, you know, ultimately being controlled by these large industries, and just really needing to take more responsibility for really understanding how we're being marketed to, what's being marketed to us, so that we can make very conscious and informed and perhaps even ecologically responsible decisions upon our consumption. So
I feel like you know, another artist, Kim Brett, and when you were talking about that idea of not only disposable objects, but the marketing of those objects and products to specific people or to women, I began thinking about a recent conversation that we were having where, um, you know, the disposable Bic razor, it's the exact same razor for men and women. It's just one is pink and one is green or blue, and there's a price difference, and there's a way that it's used on television or in print ads when it's marketed, and it's a very, when you begin to think about it, it's a bizarre and kind of strange thing. um, so I feel like you and Kim Brett would have a really great, if you haven't already, conversation about those types of things. um, and it happens in not just things like,
mhm.
it happens in every aspect of our life where we need to purchase something, whether it's clothing, like toiletries, as we've been saying, like other travel, everything. So it's such a broad area of research and a broad
Mhm.
area that you could mine for inspiration for artwork. I was thinking about, though, Regina, how your work centers a woman, and I know that your the materials that you're using are from a family archive of sorts, but I think some of the imagery in the postcards and in the sculptural work um, speaks more broadly than that. And I'll pull up one. I'll pull up a few here, but this is the one that I was thinking of, and it's of course using a newspaper article um, that's quite old or from the past. And so even just the headline there, it says, if you suffer distress monthly from female weakness, I'm sure that speaks to a lot more people than just one particular woman. There's also another postcard in here, this one that I flashed on before. It says, nobody asked you, sir, she said. I just feel like there is a feeling within many of them that would speak to a broad range of women. Were you thinking about, like, can you talk about your process in that way? Like, were you thinking about these things, or were you thinking more about just like the rightness or the composition as you were making the postcards?
Actually, I found it really interesting when you brought up the femaleness, the womanness, and how did we feel about having it, or was it included in our work? And so I did think about it, and a couple of things came to mind. One was that most collecting is done by women. Like, I'm pretty sure that my grandmother and my mother put these things away, not my father and my grandfather. So they came to me in a female way. And there's so many more women in the photos. I'm not sure why, but it was interesting to me to contemplate their lives at the turn of the century and after. Um, by just looking at these photos. For instance, it made me remember one thing about my grandmother, who in her small high school, there were 4 women in the graduating class. And she went directly at age 17 from that graduation to teaching in a one-room schoolhouse and boarding with a farmer in the country. And I suspect she was probably a pretty good teacher. Let's see, it's my grandmother on the left. Yeah, I didn't set out to make it a female biased exhibition, but it just cropped up.
When you give us these little tidbits of information about the work, like who's in the photo, I immediately begin to draw really strong connections between the photos and then the other collage materials that you put on there, like the caramel candy or even the idea of travel. So like my aunts and my grandmother who passed away when I was quite young would always have these things in her pocket. Like I would always have a little candy if I knew where to look for it. It was right in her coat pocket. So they speak to me as well. And then
can I just say something about this card too, Tyler? I immediately went to the mileage on a woman's body.
Oh my goodness.
And yeah, so I found that interesting. There was 3 older women in this photo, and just immediately I saw these 3 women as Regina, Marlene, and myself, and how we have mileage on our bodies and our careers as artists. So.
And the experience gained.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Journey.
These were World War II ration stamps, and it seemed, again, just appropriate to plunk down some candy on top of that. Happens.
I was particularly drawn to this one initially, and I know we talked about it before, but even just the gesture of the little girl in the photo, and then the gesture of the seal on one side. And I know you were saying that was you as a little girl in this photo. I just think for some reason the composition is so beautiful. And going back to that idea of rightness, I think there's a lot of consideration and thought put into each one placing. I can almost imagine you in your studio with a desk full of different materials, sort of moving and placing things and rearranging to find what really fits. Even this one, the color composition and the way that everything sort of swoops up to that one side. But I did have maybe one more question before I open it up to the audience for questions here.
Sorry, Tyler, could I speak about women?
I would love it if you would.
Before you skip to the next thing, because that's, you sort of missed me on that, and something that's quite important in terms of my work.
My apologies, go for it.
Yeah, the series of photographs that I've made remind me of what Regina said about speculating and wondering about the value and the importance of one woman's life. And that's sort of how I started with photographing women, not to eliminate the other genders of our existence, but I was very, very curious about how one woman exists in the world. And if I pick a moment or an aspect or an idea about her life and I try to put that together, I know myself as a woman, I'm often, even as a sculptor, moving through from a female perspective, a feminine perspective. And even although it's bronze or structural steel, it's still, I see my work as quite feminine. I love that. But the women, to focus on each of the women, there have been 8 so far, and to take, for instance, speaking about grandmothers, my mother, not a grandmother, but taking the idea of her being born on a farm in the East Coast, with aspirations to be an urban woman, which she became. You know, she traveled across Canada selling cosmetics. She was urban to the core and loved that. But when I thought about my mother, I thought of her being urban, but being rural simultaneously. And conceptually, in the photo series of her, I wanted to put them together. So I took the space of the family barn with all the light pouring through the wood slats, all the hay and the hay bales all over the floor. And then I sewed a silver lame evening gown for my mother to wear so that I could put her urban self, glamorous self, back with the morality of the farm and the rural life. And to me, it painted a full picture of who this woman was. And if I could make a series of 5,000 women, I'd be happy. I'd just go around the world doing that maybe, and nothing else, but just that idea of focusing on women, a woman, her place, what her life and her place and herself mean to her. So I have to say that woman is huge in myself and my work.
And if I could just pick up on that, because it sounds like, especially with the dresses that you've been making, it sounds like you have a sense of the woman, and then the ideas for the dress start to come in, and you not match, but you find what feels appropriate and what feels like in keeping with that woman's spirit. I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about that with reference to the peony dress, because I don't have a picture of the woman wearing the dress in the setting, but I feel like there's a really interesting story here that we just haven't heard yet.
Well, first of all, the peony dress is the result of the peony. The peony is the most incredible, to me, Canadian flower. Tough, tough, tough. It lives through our winters, comes back every year for 100 years, possibly, and it's exotic and it's beautiful. So I am so in love with the peony that one day I took a peony apart and I discovered that there were layers and layers and layers and layers of petals, from large down to small. So I made a pattern from the peony, and I decided I would make a peony myself out of cloth. And so I found a black taffeta and material, partly conceptually, and I created all these individual peonies. I probably made in total about 60 peonies. And it was, again, it was a labor of love. I think that's a women's thing. Women do love the labor of detail and handwork and so on. Very, very often I do myself. So I designed then a dress that would contain the peonies, again, going back to the idea of preciousness, sort of taking how precious I feel the peony is, creating a dress that would then be worn by some woman. And then, so in this case, I photographed a young woman and I took her to an abandoned farm at the edge of my village, because that is where often you see the oldest peonies, on old farms. They year after year, 100 years or more, they just come back. Nobody has to look after them. They just come for you. So that's sort of a little bit of the history behind the peony dress.
Well, it's an absolutely stunning dress, and talking about a labor of love, I can see all the work that went into each petal and the placing and the arranging. I do wish I had a better photo of that photograph that you took behind, where the woman is sort of standing at the abandoned barn. You really do get a sense of like a story or a narrative that's going on in that place, because of the combination of the place, the woman, and the dress. And so very strong work there. And then when it comes to the quilted dress, it's hard not to notice that so many of there are names stitched into the dress, and then the last name is Hilton on some of them. So I'm wondering if you could speak to that as well.
Well, basically, again, it's about the idea of tradition and connectiveness, and especially connectiveness woman to woman to woman. So I've embroidered on the dress all of my great-grandmother's grandmother's mother, daughters, and granddaughters. So the females that are connected to me in, I guess, the bloodline. So these are 3 of my granddaughters. And I, again, with the tradition of the stitchery, the tradition of the quilt, just the idea of the connectedness back through the women generationally. Ah, Jeanette. So again, you know, and the whole business of the embroidery and the time it took, it was so meditative, it was so calming that I actually used to just be excited to get up so I could start to embroider once again. I don't know, for months, I embroidered every day on this dress.
When I look at this dress, I automatically think of quilting, obviously, and I think of the tradition of quilting and a quilting, like a quilting circle, or maybe I'm using quilting bee in the wrong way, but just a group specifically of women who would get together and make an object like this, and not, you know, sharing skills, sharing those sorts of things, but the other information and the other stories and the other histories that were passed between the women at that event. I think this in particular really speaks to me about, even though it's on a mannequin that is very lifelike, the dress speaks so much about the history of a tradition that is specifically for women or from women.
Very much so.
And so we're at 1 o'clock now, and I thought it would be a good time to go to questions from the audience. So if you have any questions, I encourage you to put them in the chat. I do want to, I noticed that Jeanette has joined us, so I would love to give Jeanette the opportunity to have the first question if she would like it. Yeah, but otherwise I will leave it open to the chat for a few minutes. Jeanette, did you want to, did you have a question? Maybe she's having trouble. Oh, I think I can hear you, Jeanette. Are you there?
Hold on. Oh, there. Sorry, you took me by surprise, Tyler. I'm trying to type in the chat. You know, you took me by surprise. I just managed to get here and log in, and I was listening to all of this. And I guess for me, you know, I've always enjoyed. I've been a fan of Marlene for many years. She can state so much with her work that is, you know, with the fragility of her work and have it seem so strong. I actually, when I look at this work, I look at it as armor, female armor, that is like a protection, and taking something that is so fragile and converting it into something that is very strong. And I was wondering if any of that was something, and that's my own interpretation, but I was curious whether or not those thoughts at all, you know, entered into Marlene's mind.
Well, that's just a fascinating perception, and I'm going to keep it. I'm going to take it over because I didn't think of that. But, you know, when you say that, for instance, the inside of my skin crazy quilted dress here is an armor because it holds the power of the generations of women within my own family. And it's not just me. I think all of us feel that way. And so I am empowered by the women who've come before me, and I hold their strength within me and can't do it alone. You really cannot do it alone. Even the embroidering of my children and grandchildren, or granddaughters and granddaughters onto the dress, those young people carry forth an even greater power. So we're just all totally connected. And yes, it's a huge armor. Thank you.
Well, I actually, if I can step one step further, in talking to you about bringing your work to the space. And then when we had talked about, who would be working with you, there was the aspect of like, I enjoy sharing with people a different interpretation of sculpture. So to bring people your work, both your work and Jill's work, and have it seem that it disguised as female or fragile, but the reality of the strength within the work, within the term of sculpture, was something that I was overwhelmed when you guys had gotten the show all together. It was more than I could ever have imagined. So thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome. I agree with you. The combination of two work, when you step into the gallery and you see Jill's work and my work combined in that space, it is both lush and it is powerful. The materials are incredibly feminine, but there is like a massive power in the room. And I'm
Yes.
sure Jill can speak to that.
Yeah, I hope more people can come in, and thank you for being there while I couldn't be, because it really would have, I was really distressed about that. So thank you.
Not a problem.
So I have a few questions in the chat here. One of them comes from Carol, and it doesn't specify who it's for, but so I'll ask it to all of you, but maybe I'll get Jill to start. It says, does your art call to or reflect the young woman or middle-aged or older woman in these times of planetary crisis?
Well, I don't think my work leaves anyone out.
Right.
If anything, because I'm covering so many of the figurines' heads and bodies, it might even, it helps to expand our understanding of a woman, of a gender, who's to be included. So the sort of redressing of that, of the stereotype ideal beauty that's been communicated through these figurines, in covering them, I'm hoping to reach more bodies, I guess. So yeah, I don't think it leaves anyone out. And I would just, it doesn't matter our age, the young woman still exists within the older body. A young woman can be an old soul, and so it's yeah, I'm hoping that I'm not necessarily targeting one woman, but hoping to speak to a variety, to many different women, definitions of women.
I think the question is pretty interesting. It says, in these times of planetary crisis, and I take that, if the first thing I thought of was environmental crisis, but then also the crisis of the pandemic, and especially with Regina's work, 470 days, directly referencing the pandemic and that amount of time that you've been making work. I wonder if you could maybe speak to this question. When I first saw your work and I heard you talk about it, I thought about you taking that time and using these materials as a way to sort of process and to think through and to slow down. So I'm wondering if you can talk about how your work responds to the times that we're in right now.
Well, certainly the lockdown and COVID gave me time to contemplate, gave me time to do something that I for a long time thought I'd do, that I'd use these things. I don't know how else time really is affected. Time, of course, the generational thing of photographs, and it really was a time that I could look back and contemplate, not to the ones that were really old, but to the ones that were my cousins and my aunts and my mother and the people that I remember. Yeah, I don't know how that time affects it.
What about you, Marlene? Does your work have any tie to a planetary crisis?
Well, yes, because I think that from my own perspective, I'm working very tightly at the moment with things that feel solid to me, feel very good to me. And the question included, I think, whether I'm referencing cross-generational, reference women of all ages. And certainly, I think much of this particular work Inside My Skin, the references within the quilting is very cross-generational. And I think too, I both look to an older generation, although I'm getting up there myself, so it's harder to find them, but my mother is still alive, and the younger generation, because I'm very, very open to what anyone is going to feed me as information that would be helpful. Just to get through not just the pandemic, but all of it. Yeah. As long as we hang together as women across the board, we're safe.
We have one other question in the chat. So thank you, Carol, for that question. And now we have Carolyn is asking us a question. Going back to the creative process, do you know what your creation will be when you start, or does it sort of evolve as you're making it? Maybe I'll start again with Marlene.
I do have a vision of my creation, but like all visions in your head, they hit the wall when they hit the world. And in the head, it's perfect. There are no barriers. So I have always the idea, and there are always walls, always, always, always. And so the work evolves because you move into and through all of the barriers that happen, all of the accidents that happen, all of the idiosyncrasies. So you imagined a particular material, but it's not available to you, or you couldn't afford it, or so you adjust and maneuver. And so, yes, for me, there's always the vision, and then how you adapt that vision to the reality of making. And making's where it's at in so many ways. Making is amazing.
I'd love to echo that and just say it again, making is where it's at, because I find so much of the knowing what needs to come next happens when you're making. Like the work sometimes will tell you what it needs as you're going through it. Jill, I wonder about this question for you, because maybe when I look at your work, or I think about the works that are like a combination of reused materials that you found, it must depend on the materials that you find or the materials that you source as to what the final the final object will be. Do you have an image in your head when you start?
Well, I think this is I think what's interesting about this particular body work is it's really evolved over 4 years now. So when these entanglements first began, it was really about the material and what it was able to do and what it was calling for. Obviously, I was taking color into consideration, but its shape and its looseness or its tightness would determine what happened in conjunction with the next piece of knitwear that I brought to it. And then over time, most specifically with this body work, the figurine became something that was telling me that needed to happen. So I would find a narrative in the figurine that I had found. And so for example, the one you're looking at is called Addict. And you know, this whole idea that our hands just constantly need to be busy and producing, and the fact that the yarn is wrapped around completely covering the head is like we're sort of blindly producing, perhaps not considering what we're producing, and using up as a result of that production. And you know, that's you can see on the slide above it that it, you know, it's knit right onto the goes onto the wall. And so and that would really have no use for anyone other than this sort of sheer delight of knitting, which is, you know, very, very meditative. But so anyway, again, for this show, the figurines became a determining factor as to the piece that got created, but also in the one with the 3 wallflowers above the, yeah, that one there. For example, if I was working on one of my wallflowers and was really happy with it, I would revisit the other wallflowers. Well, do they need a little bit more? And so now I was sort of doing this comparison where the production of one object would then ask me to go back and look at the previous ones to see if they were done. So I might have thought they were done at one point, but then something else would happen in another work and ask me to question if something was done over here. So they really started to speak to one another and help determine one another's outcome.
I love it, and I think that's why they feel, even though they're so different, that, you know, they use similar materials, the figurine and the yarn. They feel like they all have their own personality. And even I've been looking at your social media on Instagram. They have a little, and this is maybe directly tied to the work or come up with in the moment, but they have a little story to go along with each figurine as well. Like you were saying, the addict, and then there's a few other stories that if you follow Jill on Instagram, you'll be able to read those stories. That ties them together and yet gives them distinct personality. Regina, I wonder if you have an idea in your head when it comes to maybe the sculptures or the postcards before you make them, and if you're trying to work towards that goal of the image in your head.
No, I definitely had no image initially. I just find something that attracted me and laid it on one of the postcards, and then would just intuitively, aesthetically, images that worked together, that spoke to each other. No, there was nothing planned about it. And the same with the sculptures. I started working with the clay, and it just felt good to squeeze it and play with it. Maybe that's a COVID thing too. I had all the time in the world and not much ability to accomplish some of the things that I had intended to with all this time. But obviously a need to stay in my studio and do something. So yeah, that's it.
Well, I'm getting so many comments of just how many people are enjoying the show. Janet saying, terrific presentation. I look forward to seeing the show in person. Camilla said, I have fabrics, photos, stamps, but most of all children's books with beautiful illustrations. But now I have lots of inspiration with what to do with these wonderful objects. Thank you for such a wonderful show. I have one other question that I would love to get to from Kim. And Kim says, even though the narrative around these works appear serious, I sense there's an aspect of humor and creative play in many of the works in the show. Can the artists speak to this perceived dichotomy? So how about we swing back to Marlene.
I don't feel anything in my work is frivolous. I feel the materials and the color, the tactileness is all joyful, but it's also incredibly serious to me that when I think about how much I invest in terms of the idea and concept for my work, I can't get past the seriousness of the thought process, but I certainly easily can find the joy in the materials. So if the question seems to me to belong totally to Jill. So if I think about one of Jill's work where it's Survivor and the little tiny hand is like so minuscule that unless she pointed it out, I'm not sure you'd find it. She's so balled up in her bundle of wool. So I love the question, but I don't think it applies to me. Yeah, that one.
such a good work. This little hand on the left side that seems to be reaching out for someone to pull them from this, giant globule of fabric. Yeah, and they all have this, even though the figurines underneath don't necessarily, this isn't their intended pose. You're changing the pose, or you're changing what we think the pose is. They just match and they fit so well. So I find a little humor in there, as well as some serious, like, it's obvious that this figure is drowning in fabric, and that's a serious, to drown is a very serious thing. But you can't get over just the humor in in the pose, especially in this one, or in the figurine that's consuming cake, but is also being consumed by cake. Yeah, I really love them.
There's quite a bit of research about humor as being a way into serious issues that can help us actually heal, deal and heal with trauma in a much more efficient way, and also draw people into a conversation that's not as threatening, or placing blame on others. So to poke fun at these serious issues through these playful assemblages of architectural elements, porcelain figurines, and yarn, not only allows me to sort of laugh at the overwhelmingness of material culture, but also, like, it allows me to reflect and okay, so how do I now move forward, knowing or addressing all these issues? How can I take this up within my own life or within my practice? So humor allows us to enter in and have discussions without the sort of threatening aspects of the seriousness, I guess.
And what about you, Regina? I definitely sense some humor in some of your works.
Yes, I feel there was. But I was interested in what Jill just said about it being more or less cathartic humor in helping us heal. And I hadn't thought of that being part of what I did, or part of the reason, but I can see that was happening. And it was so much fun when things came together and were funny. So yeah, it's interesting to think about what humor does for us and how it might help us. So I'm glad there's a bit here.
Well, I know we all need a little bit of humor, especially these days. But the power of humor is sometimes not recognized as much, and so I think all of these works really showcase that power, just as Jill said, that sort of learning power. So we're getting close to the end of our time. I would love to offer Jeanette, if she's still there, any last remarks?
Thank you, Tyler. I'm looking forward to seeing the recording to see what I missed, and I caught the last end, but it's wonderful. I do want to thank everyone for the wonderful work that's in the gallery. Thank you, Tyler, for coordinating this. Thank you to the MacLaren for giving these artists this opportunity to bring this work forward. And all the works are equally strong. I don't know if you had more time to talk about Regina's work, but I really felt that was a wonderful celebration of an art practice in the mode of making, because it was this contemplative body of work that seemed to progress over time, that, you know, that we had talked about it last year about the work and what she was going to be doing. And then it expanded because of the, you know, we talked about the sculpture work and how an artist can adapt to what's happening around her, you know, and bring this work together. So I do hope that we have more opportunity for people to come. And like I say, Tyler, I'm very grateful to the MacLaren. I do have to say that I am grateful to Karen Carter, who initially suggested the opportunity to work with the MacLaren, which I thought, you know, and the MacLaren, you know, taking that on, you and the new director taking that on and making this happen. And I think it's a wonderful statement of collaboration and working together and bringing more things to the people. So thank you very much. Oh, I have to say thank you to our sponsor, Whistle.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jeanette, and for allowing us to continue to do this, for bringing together all these amazing artists for this amazing 2 shows at Be Contemporary. Thank you to Marlene, Regina, and Jill as well for your work and your time and your thoughts on all of this. And I would encourage everyone to just go on to Be Contemporary's website and book a visit to the show, which closes on September 4th. So thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, Tyler. Thanks,
Thank you,
Marlene.
Tyler.
Oh, thank you, everyone. It was a wonderful, wonderful moment.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye now.
Okay. Bye.